Not MIA, just happy to see you. How are you guys?
My movies when I was little, number one, Pocahontas. Obsessed.
Really?
Obsessed. Everything with Pocahontas. And then Mulan. Those are my two favorites. Oh, I would literally sing that to myself in the mirror as a little kid. Like, why can't I sound exactly like her? I don't know, because you're not like in your 30s. Like, I don't know what to tell you.
You were just born a singer. Let's get down to business. It's one of the many reasons why, as much as I love the place, I'll say to visit for even extended periods of time. I could never live there. Because I'm the person that'll be literally standing online and there's one bus left and the planet is exploding and I'm still waiting online while everybody else is
I so appreciate that you say online.
You know, what's that?
I so appreciate that you say online.
As opposed to?
Inline. New Yorkers say online. And I get a lot of flack for it.
Oh no, that's you know, it's so funny. It never even occurred to me, but now that you say it, now someone like mentioned to me once, like in college, and I was like, wow. Because they're like, what do you mean online? Surfing the web? Like the water thing. You know? Wow, that's funny. I don't know what they do in LA, but you'll
I don't know what they do. Yeah. It's a virtual line, probably.
Everything. You cut the line. Hello. I see you guys. I don't know what time.
It is 5:59.
Feeling as usual on it. Very good. Marcel and on, that's for sure. Okay. Okay, I'll turn it over to you. Are you doing that opening or are you doing something else?
Yes. No, not that, but not what he's playing.
Okay, well, Shabbat Shalom, everybody. Good to see all of you. So we'll turn it over to Lord, or do we do the candles first?
Why don't we start with a song?
Let's start with a song. I think that's good. Let's start with a song. We'll turn it over to Cantor.
Ojavo Shalom Aleinu. Ojavo Shalom Aleinu. Ojavo Shalom Aleinu. Ve'al kulam. Ojavo Shalom Aleinu. Ojavo Shalom Aleinu. Ojavo Shalom Aleinu. Ve'al kulam. Salam Aleinu ve'al kol ha'olam. Salam Shalom. Salam
Shabbos, everybody. We're going to light our candles on page 120. I'll light them, Cantor will bless them, and we'll invite those that are watching at home to get your candles ready as well.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu le'adlik ner shel Shabbat.
Amen. We'll turn now to page 130, and we'll begin Kabbalat Shabbat together at the very top of the page.
Lechu neranena l'Adonai nariya letzorich Nekadma fanav etoda bizmirot nari aloy
Turn now to page 131, Shiru Ladonai, towards the top of the page in Hebrew. Turn now to page 132, the bottom paragraph in Hebrew, Or Zarua.
Or Zarua, Latzadik, Uishelev Simcha. Or Zarua, Latzadik, Uishelev Simcha. Or Zarua.
turn now to page 134, Zamru Ladonai, beginning at the very top of the page.
Zamru Ladonai
We'll turn now to page 135, Romamu, the last Hebrew paragraph in the middle of the page.
Romamu Adonai Eloheinu ve'nishtachanu le'har kosho. Romamu Adonai Eloheinu ve'nishtachanu le'har kosho. Ki kadosh Adonai Eloheinu Romamu. Ki kadosh Adonai Eloheinu Romamu. Romamu Adonai Eloheinu ve'nishtachanu le'har kodsho.
We'll turn now to Lechadodi on page 138. As a reminder, we'll do the first, second, fifth, and ninth paragraphs, and for the final paragraph, we'll rise in body or spirit and face towards the door we entered through the back.
Lechadodi likrat kala, B'nei Shabbat nekabela. 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 Shamor v'zachor b'dibur echad, Hishmianu el hamnuchad. Adonai echad u'shemo echad, v'shemu tiferet b'tfila. Lechadodi likrat kala, B'nei Shabbat nekabela. Lechadodi likrat kala, B'nei Shabbat nekabela. Likrat Shabbat lechu v'necha, ki hi mekor haberacha, ve'rosh mikedem nesucha, sof ma'aseh b'machsheva tchila. Lechadodi likrat kala, B'nei Shabbat nekabela. Lechadodi likrat kala, B'nei Shabbat nekabela. V'toreh kala B'nei Shabbat nekabela Lecha dodi likrat kala B'nei Shabbat nekabela Boi לשלום עצרת בעלה גם בשמחה ובצולה תוך אמוני עם סגולה בואי חלה בואי חלה לך דודי לקראת כלה B'nei Shabbat nekabela Lecha dodi likrat kala B'nei Shabbat nekabela.
We're all thinking the same thing. I think we're saving the big dance for when we get back into the building. I think that's going to be the first big one. We'll have to make sure that we somehow record. Well, actually, we will. We'll have recorded that for posterity. So we're going to turn to page 140, on page 140 again towards the top of the page.
מזמור שיר ליום השבת, טוב להודות לאדוני, ולזמר לשמך עליון, ולזמר לשמך עליון. מזמור שיר ליום השבת, טוב להודות לאדוני, ולזמר לשמך עליון, ולזמר לשמך עליון. להגיד בבוקר חסדך, באמונתך בלילות. עלי יסוד ועלי נאמר, עלי היגיון מכינות. מזמור שיר ליום השבת, טוב להודות לאדוני, ולזמר לשמך עליון, ולזמר לשמך עליון. צדיק אתה מר יפרח, כארז בלבנון ישנא, שתולים בבית אדוני, בחצרות אלוהינו יפריחו. עוד מנוב ומסבה, דשני ורעננים יהיו, להגיד כי ישר אדוני צורי, ולא עוולת בו.
We'll turn now for the Chatzi Kaddish on page 144.
יתגדל ויתקדש שמי רבה, ויעמד יברח חירותי וימליך מלכותי, בחייכון וביומכון ובחיי דכל בית ישראל, בעגלה ובזמן קריב, ויאמרו אמן. יהי שמי רבה מברך, לעולם ועלמיה יתברך. יתברך וישבח, ויתפאר ויתרומם ויינשא, ויתהדר ויתהלל ויתהלל, שמי דקודשה בריחו, לילה מן כל ברכתה ושירתה. תושבחתה ונחמתה, דמירה בעלמה, ויאמרו אמן.
We rise in body or spirit for the Baruch Hu on page 146.
Am I awake? Am I prepared? Are you listening to my prepared. Marechu et Adonai HaMevorach. Baruch Adonai HaMevorach Le'olam Va'ed, Le'olam Va'ed. Ya 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 na, ya na na na, ya na na ya, ya na na na, ya 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 na, ya na na na, ya na na ya, ya na na na.
Please be seated. We're now on page 149. We'll read together in English at the top of the page. Praise to you, Adonai, our God, from whom the evening flows. Your wisdom sets the way on which time and season glide. Your breath guides the sail of the stars. Creator of the tide of time and light, you guide the current of day into night. As heaven spans to infinity, you set its course for eternity. Praise to you, Adonai, our God, from whom the evening flows.
Umavir yom umevi laila, umavdil ben yom uvin laila, Adonai tzvot shemo, El chai v'kayam, tamid yimloch aleinu leolam va'ed, Baruch atah Adonai,
Baruch Shemo.
Hamariv haravi.
Amen. We'll turn now to page 150.
Ahavat olam et Yisrael amcha avta Torah u'mitzvot chukim u'mishpatim otanu lemadeta Al kein Adonai Eloheinu v'shochbeinu Nasiach mekukecha V'nismach v'divrei Toratecha U'v'mitzvotecha Le'olam va'ed Ki hem hayenu Ve'orech yameinu Uvahem neged yomam v'layla Ve'avatecha al tasir mimenu le'olamim Baruch atah Adonai
Baruch Shemo.
Ohev Amo Yisrael. Shema Yisrael Adonai Eloheinu Adonai Echad.
Please join me on page 154. ואהבת את אדוני אלוהיך בכל לבבך ובכל נפשך ובכל מאודיך והיו הדברים האלה אשר אנוכי מצווך היום על לבבך ושיננתם לבניך ודיברת בם בשבתך בביתך ובלכתך בדרך ובשוכבך ובקומך וקשרתם להיות על ידיך והיו לטוטפות בין עיניך וכתבתם על מזוזות ביתך ובשעריך למען תזכרו ועשיתם את כל מצוותי והייתם קדושים לאלוהיכם אני אדוני אלוהיכם אשר הוצאתי אתכם מארץ מצרים להיות לכם לאלוהים אני אדוני אלוהיכם אדוני אלוהיכם אמת. Let's read together now on the top of page 157. Standing on the parted shores of history, we still believe what we were taught before ever we stood at Sinai's foot, that wherever we go, it is eternally Egypt, that there is a better place, a promised land, that the winding way to that promise passes through the wilderness, that there is no way to get from here to there except by joining hands and marching together. As we turn to page 158, Mi Chamocha. Adonai, Himloch, Leolam, Vaed, Adonai, Himloch, Leolam, Vaed. We'll turn now to page 160, Hashkivim.
Let there be love and understanding among us. Let peace and friendship be our shelter from life's storm. Hashkileinu, Adonai Eloheinu. Hashkileinu v'shalom, le'ha'amidenu, shomreinu lechaim, ufros aleinu sukat shlomecha. Hashkileinu, Adonai Eloheinu. Hashkileinu le'shalom. Let there be love and understanding among us. Let peace and friendship be our shelter from life's storm.
We turn now to page 162, Vishamru at the very top of the page.
Veshamru v'nei Yisrael et ha-Shabbat, la'asot et ha-Shabbat לדורותם ברית עולם. ושמרו בני ישראל את השבת, לעשות את השבת לדורותם ברית עולם. ביני ובין בני ישראל אותי לעולם, אותי לעולם. ושמרו בני ישראל את השבת
לעשות את השבת לדורותם ברית עולם.
כי ששת ימים עשה אדוני את השמיים ואת הארץ, ושמרו בני ישראל את השבת לעשות את השבת לדורותם ברית עולם. וביום השביעי שבת לי נפש, שבת לי נפש, שבת לי נפש,
ושמרו בני ישראל את השבת לעשות את השבת לדורותם ברית עולם. I'll invite those in the room to rise in body or spirit, those watching at home to do the same as we turn to page 164. Cantor Lauren will help us to begin the Amidah together, and then we will continue silently. From that point on, please go at your own pace, and when you're finished, you may be seated.
Adonai sefatai tiftach ufi yagit yilatecha. Adonai, open up my lips, and my mouth may declare your praise. Ay, 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 meditations of my heart be acceptable before you. O God, my rock and my redeemer. O say shalom bimromav, hu yaseh shalom aleinu, le'al kol Yisrael. Leimeru, leimeru, amen.
We turn now to page 371 as we prepare for our Misha Berach this evening. In a moment, I'll read our Misha Berach list, but of course, we will extend our hearts and our prayers to the entire country of Ukraine and to all of those who have suffered so terribly over the last few weeks and inevitably will continue. So our hearts extend beyond just those that we hold closest to us, and we turn, as I said, to page 371. Tonight in our community, we're thinking of Debbie Block-Kroll, Howard Sanborn, Gail Gambino, Brad Friedman, Mike Klinghoffer, Norma Polsak, Dina Batchana, Bentzi Tepper, Tzipora Ahava, Gittel Bat Shmuel Vaviva, Chaim Leib, Joyce Weinberg, Stu Pollack, Jane London, Catherine Guarino, Judy Stern, Miriam Kornfeld, Raz Brody, Chana Ruth Bat Sarah, Fagel Tzipora Bat Elisheva, Richard Gambino, Michelle Sawicki, Idel Basha Bat Yitzchak, Tzvi Menachem Ben Chaim, Amy and Gavin Tucker, Janice Kurz, David Dowling, Israel Ben Yitzchak, Lorraine Danis, Buddy Kosoff, Shelley Newmark, David Kyle Klopman, Rivka Bat Rachel, Sarah Bat Chana, Moshe Eliezer Ben Sivya, Peretz Ben Yehuda, Leah Bat Naomi, Gedalia Ben Leah, Justin Banner, Tzipora Ahava Bat Yehudit Rachel, Jane Beard Cass, and Amy Cass. In addition to the names that we just shared, if there's anyone in the room with us tonight that has additional names to share, we'll start on this side of the room and work to the rear on this side of the room. And if you have names, just to please raise a hand. Keith Lauren will now lead us in the Misha Berach on page 371.
Misha Berach Avotenu Mekor HaBracha Leimotenu. May the source of strength, who bless the ones before us, help us find the courage to make our lives a blessing, and let us say, Amen. Misha Berach Imotenu Mekor HaBracha Lavotenu. Bless those in need of healing with refuah shalema, the renewal of body, the renewal
Shabbat Shalom, everyone. Hopefully this mic will kick on in a second. There it is. So we'll begin first by acknowledging that this month is Women's History Month, of which I'll get to the Jewish part in a second. And I want to begin with just a little test. So do we know the name of the first woman ordained as a rabbi? Any guesses? Any knowledge? Beth? Okay, so we have one for Sally Prezant. Anybody else recognize that name at all? Okay, so we're learning a lot tonight then. So interestingly enough, I believed that for a very long time myself. It turns out that she is definitely, without question, the first woman ordained as a rabbi in the United States of America. But there is somebody that predated her actually by a considerable margin, and I'm going to talk about her tonight, because I can assume if we only knew one person in the room knew Sally Prezant, the chances of knowing this name is probably next to none. And I want to say at the outset that all of this information I'm going to share with you tonight can be found on a really remarkable website and resource that not enough people know about and use. And I'm on a mission to explore and tell everybody about every conceivable thing you can find online that is of quality Jewish education and material. It is known as the Jewish Women's Archive. It is both a physical place and a remarkable website filled with information that I can almost guarantee not enough of us know. And so, as I said, most of my information tonight, to give credit, is by a remarkably well-written and well-researched article, and to give credit where it's due, by Lisa Klapchek. Okay, but all of this can be found, including a really great 10-minute documentary, which I'll tell you about at the end. But I want to share the story of Rabbi Regina Jonas. And I'm told that in German, as she was from Berlin, Regina Jonas, I believe, is the proper pronunciation, but at the risk of mispronouncing her name in both directions, I will stick with the Americanized version. So Rabbi Regina Jonas, of course, did not begin out her life as a rabbi. She was born in 1902 in Berlin. And just to set the historical frame and context for this, most of us, when we think about Berlin in the 1900s, we have only one association, which of course is the Holocaust and everything surrounding it. But you must understand that in the early 1900s, late 1800s, early 1900s, Berlin was the epicenter of progressive thought. Right? It was by far and away in Europe and really in the entire world at the forefront of the better qualities of emancipation and enlightenment and humanism. And unfortunately, some of those qualities were then manipulated and eventually taken advantage of by the fascists when the Nazis rose to power. But the world that she was born into was actually a world of possibilities. Not every possibility, but as we'll hear, she made the most of the opportunities that she had, and she pushed well beyond what were the conceivable barriers of her time. So as I said, she was born in 1902. Unfortunately, her father died when she was only, I believe, 13 years old. But we don't have a lot of information about her early years. Our assumption is that actually her father was her first real teacher in Jewish thought, practice, halakha, etc. And as a result of this, it grew a really powerful early experience in her life in which she was able to be engaged with and access Jewish texts and Talmud and all of the things that we sort of take for granted today that would have actually been out of the reach of many, many, many women throughout history. And it engendered a certain sense of passion within her that she followed even in her earliest years. And while the Orthodox world, of course, was not likely to be the one receiving in positive ways a young girl who wanted to be a rabbi, there was one rabbi in particular in the Orthodox world at the time who had a rather open mind, especially as regarded educating young women in particular in Jewish practice and Jewish thought, and not generally approaching it the way that it had been approached for really all the previous millennia. So at that point, Rabbi Max Weil sort of took her under his wing, and they met weekly and they studied weekly. And it became, again, a part of her life, so much so that she began to profess out loud that she wanted to follow in his footsteps and in others and to become a rabbi, which you can imagine, again, was met probably in some cases with a chuckle and in other cases with outright hostility. And yet, as they say, she persisted. In 1924, she was admitted to the Hochschule, which I won't give it the full German name because my German is awful. But in 1870s or so in Berlin, this was sort of the first, I guess what you would say, kind of a proto-version of the institution that ordained me and that is currently training Cantor Lauren, the Hebrew Union College, in that it was an academic institution on par with, Berlin University and various sorts, and at the same time was also a seminary and was training, young, nascent, what we would call in today's terms progressive rabbis, but rabbis that were emerging in the world of emancipation and enlightenment. And so she was admitted, she was not the first female student to the Hochschule by any means, but she was the first one who, again, was saying publicly that she wanted to pursue and be admitted into the rabbinic program and to become a rabbi. So things progress, and she eventually writes a graduate thesis, which is a necessary step in order to be ordained. And the title of that thesis, as you might imagine, is "May a Woman Hold Rabbinic Office?" Question mark. So to save the reading of the thesis, although I'm sure it is probably worth reading it in its entirety, the answer to that question is, may a woman hold rabbinic office? Yes. Okay, and she doesn't build her arguments from what you might expect, which is the sort of secular, humanist, emancipated, egalitarian mindset of that time period. She builds her argument solely within halakha. She builds it from within Jewish law, and she refutes many of the, what we would call in Yiddish terms, Baba Maisa, that had held women back for a very long period of time. And she demonstrates, really with precision, various instances in which women throughout the Tanakh and the Talmud demonstrate a capacity to serve as what is the primary role of a rabbi. And I want to ensure that we all actually understand this. What I'm doing right now is not the primary role traditionally of a rabbi. Traditionally, a rabbi is mostly the rabbinic decisor, the legal decisor of the neighborhood in which they live. When you have a problem, when you're not sure how to do something, when there's an issue with your neighbor, historically, that was the rabbi's role. They were, in effect, the judge of their neighborhood. So to be able to serve in a judging capacity, in a legal capacity, there are many examples, not least of which several of the prophets, several of the judges, Deborah, going back that far, Beruria in the Talmud, many, many examples in which that had been refuted historically. And she makes basically a systematic argument that affirms that she, in fact, is deserving, as are other women, should they be able to, matriculate through the program and ultimately graduate and improve their knowledge base and their ability to decide, that they should receive smicha as well. Now, she was lucky at this point that she had a professor who was at least understanding, if behind the scenes supportive, but at the same time not quite willing to go so far as to ordain her, but accepted the thesis, gave it, I believe that the mark in the end said good, I think is what it was told, which, of course, there is a certain amount of cynicism in that statement. But nonetheless, we don't know whether that professor actually would have ordained her because, unfortunately, he passes away. And when he passes away, the person that takes on the role of that position ultimately refuses to ordain her. And so she continues on undeterred until in 1935, Max Dynaman, who lived roughly around that period, 1875 to 1939, who at the time was the executive director of the Conference of Liberal Rabbis, agreed to the ordination on behalf of the Verband, everybody else that is part of the conference. So her diploma on the ordination reads as follows. It says, and this is from the writing of Rabbi Max Dynaman, who's giving this smicha, since I saw that her heart is with God and Israel, and that she dedicates her soul to her goal, and that she fears God, and that she passed the examination in matters of religious law, I herewith certify that she is qualified to answer questions of religious law and entitled to hold the rabbinic office, and may God protect her and guide her on all her ways. Now, again, to state what a radical statement that is in its time, right? By today's standards, we would hope that that would have been the response from everybody. But in its time, this was a person actually that was going out on a limb, almost immediately made him derided by many of his colleagues, both within the more progressive parts of Judaism and, of course, within the Orthodox world, because it's going against what it seemed to be an established custom that was treated as law. So, ultimately speaking, she is ordained, and in 1937, the British Jewish community, the official community itself, began to officially employ her, not in a firmly established pulpit, per se, but in, quote, pastoral rabbinic counselor positions and welfare institutions. In other words, she functioned in what is the other very important role, if not the primary role of rabbis, which is to be there for people when they are struggling. And so she worked in the hospitals, and as you can imagine, remember what year I said, 1937. Things, of course, are about to get much, much worse. And she spends her earliest period of time from Kristallnacht on, basically being the voice of comfort for an entire generation of people living in Berlin at that time, who are slowly seeing the deportations, who are losing family members, people are disappearing, and she is really, again, on the forefront and the front lines. At the outset of the war, right, she continues to do this work until eventually she and her mother are deported to Theresienstadt in November of 1942. And in this period of time, she happens to be in the same place as Viktor Frankl, who many of you may know that name, maybe not. One of the more important rabbinic writers on the nature of the Holocaust, both as a survivor and as a philosopher in general. Also Rabbi Leo Beck, who that name probably sounds a little bit more familiar, but better known in Europe. But the major seminary, for example, in the UK is the Leo Beck Seminary. So both of them were contemporaries. They were rabbis alongside with her. In Theresienstadt, they tried to basically keep a community going. And they had services of a sort, and she delivered sermons of a sort. And again, these guys knew her. But we'll return to that in a little bit as to why that actually is a disappointing fact, which I'll explain in just a moment. So unfortunately, as you can imagine, it doesn't end well for her and her mother. They are ultimately transported to Auschwitz. We don't know the exact date of their death, but we are certain that that's where they ultimately died. And ultimately speaking, we would probably not even know her name. Her entire history would have been obliterated along with the millions others that we know very little, if nothing, about. But for whatever reason, she had an instinct, and she left papers both in an archive in Berlin and actually, believe it or not, in Terezin in an archive as well. And the reason why at the beginning of this, when I asked the question of who's the, right, because until the 1980s, the assumption was that Sally Priesand was in fact the first ordained woman rabbi, because as far as anybody knew, that was it. Never heard of Regina Jonas. And the only reason why it even came to light was after the fall of the Berlin Wall. All of this stuff was on the other side of the wall. So when the wall comes down, suddenly there is an ability to access the archives that you couldn't access anymore. And the archivists start to find her writing. And she tells the story of who she is and how she came to be a rabbi and what was going on in the camps and all of these things. It's not a lot of material, but there's enough material to paint a rather remarkable picture. Now, here's the piece that I want to really share, which is her own words. So they found what really could be understood to be something of a last testament, something that she was writing with a certain awareness that she wasn't going to live very long. And she wanted to impart what it is to her that made her want to be a rabbi, what it is about Judaism, what it is that she sees as her role, and why in particular she felt, I think, ultimately speaking as a woman, that it was so important to be able to add her voice to our history, to our present, ultimately to our future. So she writes as follows. She says, "Our Jewish people was planted by God into history as a blessed nation. Blessed by God means to offer blessings, loving kindness, and loyalty, regardless of place and situation. Humility before God, selfless love for his creatures sustains the world. It is Israel's task to build these pillars of the world. Man and woman, woman and man alike have taken this upon themselves in Jewish loyalty. Our work in Theresienstadt, serious and full of trials as it is, also serves this end, to be God's servants and as such to move from earthly spheres to eternal ones. May all our work be a blessing for Israel's future and the future of humanity. Upright, quote-unquote, Jewish men and brave, noble women were always the sustainers of our people. May we be found worthy by God to be numbered in the circle of these women and men. The reward of a mitzvah is the recognition of the great deed by God." Rabbi Regina Jonas, formerly of Berlin. So it's haunting, but it's powerful. It's powerful. Her words would be remarkable even if we didn't know the context, even if she was just writing them, as we said, just as a woman trying to be ordained as a rabbi in the early 1900s would be remarkable. And then to add the layer of the fact that she has the cogency and the heart and the ruach to sit down and to pen something like this while waiting to die is a really remarkable statement of who the person was. And all of the archives point to numerous instances in which she basically is the glue holding together various communities in the hardest times. And yet, as I said, if we hadn't stumbled upon this information, we would never know that she existed. And going back to the point ultimately, and this is not my point to be made, but by the author of the article, that, Viktor Frankl and Leo Beck knew who she was. They knew she was an ordained rabbi. They lived past the Holocaust, and they knew the story, and they never told it. Now, it's not to say that they held back on telling it. We don't know. Nobody knew to ask them the question, but they knew the story. And the idea that they didn't decide to share that information is an example of an inherent reality that all of us unfortunately have to face, which is there probably are way more, maybe not ordained women, but women who were teaching Torah, who were learning text, who were sharing insights, who could have furthered our people, our entire community, our entire sense of Judaism, and yet we either didn't give the opportunity or we covered up the reality of their work. And I think that we have to really understand what this means because, for example, some of the most important Torah that I have ever learned or been taught has been by my female teachers and my female colleagues. So if we think about what Judaism would look like with 2,000 years of that, 2,000 years of women rabbis instead of less than a century, I think we can see how much we actually have missed and regressed ourselves without realizing just how deep the impact goes. And I'm very grateful. I don't want to end this on the negative note. I want to be grateful for who she was, even if she did all of this without any recognition of it in her lifetime, which breaks my heart. To know that her legacy is one that is carried by now an increasing number of really remarkable women rabbis who serve all across the world, many of whom are in the Ukraine right now, who have been in those communities for a long time, who have held them together as she did in very hard times. This is our best of us. This is the best of us. But the fact that, again, the rabbi of a community, the entire community itself, had never heard her name before. You know, I've been the rabbi here for 7 years. This is the first time I'm telling the story, the first time I'm reading this story. Right? It's a shanda. It's a shanda. But we can make up for that. And we can make up for that by starting to teach the things that were missed, the things that were left out, the things that were erased. And we can really do our extra work to celebrate the remarkable impact of women in our community specifically, those that serve the Reformed Jewish community, again, both here and internationally, and to push more and more and more to see and to hear that voice. As I spoke about on the High Holidays, this is not a small issue to any of us, and it can't be. And so we have to begin first by celebrating life, and then pushing ourselves a little bit further. So again, I just want to leave everybody with the taste, and then to go deeper on your own. Go check this website out, the Jewish Women's Archive, jwa.org. As I said, there's a wonderful short documentary. In 2014, they actually gathered all of the first women rabbis ordained to celebrate Rabbi Jonas and to put up a plaque in Theresienstadt for her. And so that meant, right, the first woman ordained in the Reform movement, in the Reconstructionist movement, in the Conservative movement, in the United Kingdom. And so you have this entire, array of remarkable female rabbis who are all realizing that they are connected to this woman who many of them didn't even know about until really only a few years prior. So again, I hope that you'll follow beyond what I've shared tonight, and that may we all really acknowledge Rabbi Jonas and her remarkable legacy and gift. And as I said, I was only able to pick a little bit of her writings, but she was an eloquent, beautiful, talented teacher of Torah. I just wish we had had more time with her. So with that, I wish all of us really a Shabbat Shalom, and one I hope of reflection and meaning as well. So we'll invite Cantor Lauren back up to the bima as we turn to page 586. Yes, Neil. So, okay, so in a 30-second answer to a complicated question, and I wrote actually part of my rabbinic thesis was about this sort of, again, a Baba Maisa about women's involvement in services and reading Torah and the reasons why. Actually, it was part of my High Holiday sermon, which you can always go back and watch as well. But the answer is, in the Orthodox world, there are actually several things happening that I would never have quite expected. Not the ultra-Orthodox worlds, right? The Satmar and the Chabad are not likely to change their ways anytime soon. But the modern Orthodox world, in particular those that are affiliated with Chovevei Torah in the city, and also in Jerusalem, there are several minions where now some aspects of the service can be done. And there, in fact, was one of the women in this documentary was the first female Orthodox rabbah who was ordained in Israel. Now, in Israel, it's tricky in terms of what's recognized and what's not recognized, but in her community, she is treated as the rabbi. And again, there was a growing movement. And in fact, one of my beloved teachers who I hope that we will get here at some point, Dr. Wendy Zierler, was also just officially made a rabbi, I think not so long ago, if I remember correctly. We'll have to ask Lauren's fiance.
Aaron.
Yeah, I was going to say, Aaron. Right. She's a remarkable, again, one of the people I was envisioning as I was speaking to you. And she is very much from the modern Orthodox world in Riverdale. So the answer is that there are things that are changing. I wouldn't hold my breath, as I said, for the ultra-Orthodox world. But I think that within certain parts of the Orthodox world, you are starting to see some significant changes. Not enough by my standard, obviously, but certainly some changes, and certainly things that are leading in the direction of being able to chant Torah and be fully participating in the entire service, not just certain limited parts of the service. Good question. Very good. Okay, page 586 at the bottom of the page, Aleinu, and we'll rise in body or spirit. Aleinu l'shabeach l'adon hakol, latet gedula liotzer breshit, shelo asanu kegoye haratzot, velo samanu kemishbechot adama, shelo sama chelkenu kahem, vegor aleinu kechol hamonaham, vanachnu korim umishtachavim umodim, Lifnei melech malchei hamlachim hakadosh baruch hu. Page 591. V'nehemar v'haya Adonai lemelech al kol haaretz bayom hahu yeh Adonai echad u'shemo Now invite those in mourning and those observing yahrzeit to please remain standing. Everyone else may be seated at this time. We'll begin by thinking of those who have passed in our community in recent months. Chaim Bear Greenwald, Dr. John Abdrikin, Faith Diskin, Linda Donath, Jay Fagan, Ellen Frank, Evelyn Gelb, Arthur Grossman, Gerald Hirsch, Mark Joseph, Deirdre Klein, Leo Leibowitz, William Lippman, Audrey Lubo, Morty Lynn, Jerry Monroe, Nancy Nagel, Harry Olstein, Geraldine Rosen, Harriet Roth, Jeannie Rubin, Howard Schreier, David Sent, Marlise Silverberg, Blanche Sklar, Rita Sandra Snyder, Joan Strong Tangzilius, Matthew Adam Zimmerman, and Abel Palakier. We also mark the yahrzeits that occurred during last week for Beatrice Aaron, Leonard Barretts, Hal Bergman, Philip Chester, Arthur Cohn, Edith Cohn, Rose Decker, Molly Fleischer, Jesse Feuderman, Harry Katz, Nitty Levin, Shirley Moskowitz, Ted Ronick, Seidel Saltzman, Diane Savanak, Sandra Tepper, and Herbert Tempowski. And for those that are in the room with us tonight, if there's anybody that I didn't mention that you'd like to mention their names. And we'll invite those at home, if you're remembering anyone that we did not mention, to mention their names as well. We'll invite the mourners to join me on page 598. Yitkadal v'yitkadash shemei Rabbah, ve'alma divra chirutei v'yamlich malchutei, v'chayechon uv'yomechon uv'chayei d'chol beit Yisrael, Ba'galav bizman kariv v'imru amen. Yehei shemei Rabbah mevarach le'olam li'almei almaya. Yitbarach v'yishtabach v'yitbar v'yitromam v'yitnaseh v'yitadar v'yitaleh v'yitalal shemei dekudsha berichu. Le'elam min kol birchata v'shirata tushbechata v'nechamata ta'amiran be'alma v'imru amen. Yehei shalama Rabbah min shemaya v'chaim aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'imru amen. Oseh shalom b'mromav, hu yaseh shalom, aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'imru amen. Zichronam livracha, may every one of their memories be for a blessing.
Amen.
Shabbat shalom, everyone. A few important announcements. First is to please join us for Shabbat morning services tomorrow. Again, those will be held virtually on Zoom. If you'd like to join us together on the Zoom itself, you can now do that, or you can watch it streaming on our website, YouTube channel, or Facebook page. And of course, to join us for Torah study beginning at 12 o'clock on Zoom. For our members, our wonderful members, on this Sunday, we're going to hand out Purim gift bags in front of the Old Whalers Church from 1:30 to 2:30 p.m. And of course, a reminder to join us on Erev Purim, our celebration at 6 o'clock on Zoom, with a reading of the Megillah and some other surprises to come. All of good things, all fun things, all things to help us, which is actually quite challenging right now, which is to fulfill the obligation of Purim and Adar in general, which is to be joyful. And Judaism is very tough in that way. It challenges us at times where we really would choose to do the opposite stuff. It's important that we still find a way, even in the darkness, to find that light. So this is a great opportunity for it. And again, if you're a member of the temple, come by on Sunday between 1:30 and 2:30. You'll see some smiling faces. You'll have some wonderful things in the bag, things to eat, things to make you smile. A reminder also that one of the most important things about Purim is also thinking about others. So not just Mishloach Manot, but also Matanot Le'Evyonim, gifts to those that are in need. I know that when it comes to our community, there are always those in need. The Social Justice Committee, I know, is always looking for new faces or additional hands to help us out. Shelley is always looking for help with our Maureen's Haven program. And of course, thinking about Ukraine, we've done a remarkable job. As of this morning, I think we have raised something like $12,000, if I remember correctly, towards our $18,000 goal. We may not hit that goal. We're going to get the money sent where it needs to go, but we're going to try to give a little bit more time to raise a little bit more. But it's still a remarkable outpouring of love from the entire community. And so, again, you still have an opportunity if you haven't done so and you'd like to contribute. And all of these things are really, again, keeping us in that sort of state of mind of celebrating, but at the same time celebrating with an awareness of the world in which we live and the impact that is needed. Just a reminder, a few other things coming up this week. The Nimitz will be meeting at 9 o'clock on Monday. My Heschel class, which is now moved to Mondays, at 12 o'clock. Hebrew School is back in session in person at 3:30. And the Social Justice Committee will have its regular meeting on Zoom at 5 o'clock, I believe. On Wednesday, as I said, Hebrew School is meeting at 3:30, and then our Purim program begins on Zoom at 6 o'clock. My Friday class begins at 9:15 as well. Just a reminder also, a little bit later in the month, March 24th, we're welcoming back our friends from Film Shul to focus on funny girls in commemoration of Women's History Month, talking about some of the great comedic women that have contributed, especially a lot of them, as it turns out, Jewish. So, as it works out in all angles, but some very, very, very funny people, and we're going to learn a lot about them. Also a reminder that on March 27th, there's a virtual tour of the Weitzman National Museum of American Jewish History in Philadelphia as well. And last, on March 31st, we have a book talk being led by educator Sandra Dubin on the focus of Barry Weiss's book, How to Fight Anti-Semitism. And I believe this is in partnership with the Social Justice Committee, adjunct to, and our, of course, Anti-Semitism Committee as well. We do still have a couple of copies of the book left, so if anybody would like one, please let Eileen know. Beyond that, I think the only other thing is to say we had a great update on the building progress. For anybody who hasn't gone by to see it, you really must go by and see it now, because if you were trying to imagine what it looked like, you can really get a sense of it. When I went to pick Eva up from school the other day and you can see it from the field, it's magnificent. I mean, I know we got a long ways to go, but it's magnificent and it's very exciting. And you know, we'll be back there as soon as we can. I will miss being here. I was just saying that to I think Ron before, but you know, I will be nostalgic for my time here. But at the same time, to our people who are working so hard on making this a reality, it's just phenomenal. So with that, did I forget anything? Okay, I probably did, but you're all being kind. So we're going to end with a closing song from Cantor Lauren. We'll do Kiddush, and yeah, Cantor.
We're gonna end with what we started with.
O Javo Shalom Aleinu, O Javo Shalom Aleinu, O Javo Shalom Aleinu ve'al kulam. O Javo Shalom Aleinu, O Javo Shalom Aleinu, O Javo Shalom Aleinu ve'al kulam. Salam Aleinu ve'al kol ha'olam, salam shalom. Salam Aleinu ve'al kol ha'olam, salam shalom. O Javo Shalom Aleinu, O Javo Shalom Aleinu, O Javo Shalom Aleinu ve'al kulam. O Javo Shalom Aleinu, O Javo Shalom Aleinu, O Javo Shalom Aleinu ve'al kulam.
We'll turn to page 123 for Kiddush. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam borei peri hagafen Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'ratzavanu, v'shabbat kodsho b'ahava u'vratzon inchilanu, zikaron lema'aseh v'reishit, ki hu yom techila lemikrae kodesh, zecher letziat Mitzrayim, kivanu v'achata, ואותנו קידשת מכל העמים, בשבת קודשך באהבה וברצון הנחלתנו. ברוך אתה אדוני מקדש השבת. Amen. L'chaim. Shabbat shalom, everybody. And forgive me for running out quickly. I'm just going to go turn the Zooming stream off. I'll be right back. Right. I can't wait to see what you go, right? Hi, I'm good. How are you?